for your career histories. And Secretary Vickers, thank you so much for your service to our country. You're both eminently qualified. I also want to commend your family and thank them for their support of you, for both of you, in the positions that you've held and after your confirmation for these positions. Secretary Vickers, I wanted to ask you again, you had cited the statistic in response to Senator McCain that 20 to 25% of the Guantanamo detainees have been released and have returned to the conflict. Is that the correct number?
Yes, ma'am. In the case of Guantanamo, it's closer to 25%. Of the approximately 600 that have been released, about 150. We either know they've returned or we strongly suspect that they've returned. In the case of other detainees that have been released on the battlefield, the number is between 20 and 25.
How is that fact informing release decisions going forward?
It has a strong impact on it in the sense that remaining cases are scrutinized not just for recidivism, but also the ability in the case of third countries to continue to detain them if they're transferred. And so a lot of detainees can't be transferred because there's not assurances that they'll be properly detained and not released. Part of the recidivism problem breaks down when they're transferred to another country and then they're quickly released. Part of it is, as I said, is looking at the transfer problem in itself. In zones of hostilities, it may be local politics in some cases. Someone with connections is getting someone released, and then again, there's a high probability that they'll be recidivist, but political system has intervened in the past. And so we've learned from this experience and are trying to address it, but it's not a foolproof system yet.
Given the President's executive order advocating for the closure of Guantanamo, if tomorrow we capture a high-value target in Pakistan, overseas, or perhaps someone you would deem a repeat offender, what are we doing with them?
The administration is in the final stages of revising its or establishing its detention policy, but there is a challenge with those picked up outside zones of hostilities. In zones of hostilities in Afghanistan, principally now, there are well-established procedures and mechanisms to detain them for the period as required. If a terrorist was picked up in Somalia, for example, or cite one example of a very ungoverned space, that has been a vexing challenge for both administrations, I would add, both the Bush administration and the Obama administration, and there's not an obvious solution that presents itself. But the USDI's responsibility in this is to work on the intelligence aspects and not the detainee policy, and so I would defer to my policy colleagues in the Undersecretary for Policy's office and Detainee Affairs to address your question more fully.
Secretary Vickers, I fully appreciate that there are others that will have more direct impact on this, but given the breadth of experience that you have in this area and the vexing challenges that you've identified, what recommendations would you have to your colleagues in the administration on how we can best address this issue to make sure that if we capture a high-value target in one of these areas, that we can make sure that we have the ability to interrogate that individual, and also if they present a continuing threat, that we can detain them?
So on the interrogation side, the first step to extract intelligence, the administration has established a high-value interrogation group led by the FBI with participation from defense and CIA as well, That group has deployed several times, and that mechanism should work well for interrogation and debriefing of detainees. Options range from transferring to another country, provided human rights assurances and access to the detainee and others can be met. But given the problem that many countries are either incapable or unwilling of taking some of these detainees, we require some mechanism to be able to detain them ourselves. And that, again, others in the administration are working that very hard.
And when we transfer to another country, Secretary Vickers, aren't we in a position there where we also don't have full control over the situation in terms of, even if we get assurances from a country, what the terms will be for that? The level of control we have is much less than if we had them, for example, in a Guantanamo-type facility.
Well, before we transfer anyone, we want assurances that in a number of areas, as I said, that if they need to be detained, that the country in question is capable of detaining them. If there is intelligence value to the detainee, that we would have access to that detainee. But countries are sovereign, and we do our best to ensure that these conditions are met. They're not always met 100% in some of these areas, and so again, that's part of the challenge.
How can Congress help with this issue? Because it's obviously of deep concern if we are in a position where we capture our high-value target or a repeat offender, and that person still remains a danger, or we need to have them in a position where we can gather important information from them.
It is critical to have the option of capturing for laws of war, but also for intelligence value as well. And again, this is something that my colleagues in the interagency and within the Department of Defense are working, and I'm sure they will come to the Congress for help on this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your answers today. Thank you, Dr. Rooney.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Secretary Vickers for your past service.